The one you're referring to is the property category. So there are three P's. There's the property category that we're assessing. There's the person category that we're assessing, and there's the process efficiency that we're assessing. So, all three are weighted a little differently, but each one plays a part in, as you say, getting to the lease.
Peter Roisman, welcome to the show. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Dustin. Happy to be here.
So before we jump into the meat of the conversation and talk about your journey, could you just briefly introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm a real estate investor, and I also run a company called REV, which is a professional leasing company for the multifamily industry.
So a couple of things with knowing your background and your portfolio is a lot of things that I want to jump into. But before we talk about the entrepreneurship and the real estate, can you talk a little bit about where you're from and where you grew up? We want to hear your origin story.
Yeah, so I grew up in Connecticut, central Connecticut, West Hartford, and went off to college in Massachusetts. Went to law school, but I actually played college golf. So then I thought about doing that as a career and spent a winter in Florida playing decent golf, but having my ego handed to me. And I'd be even par, and I'd be playing with 14-year-old kids that were 8 under par. I kind of realized that being a player really wasn't going to do it. So I went back to law school at University of Connecticut and became a sports lawyer. And I started representing athletes and coaches and broadcasters while I was in law school, and did that till my late 30s. I ended up joining Octagon and running the golf division there for 4 or 5 years, and then leaving there and getting into real estate development and commercial real estate, and particularly with a focus on multifamily.
All right. You just summed it all up. That's the show, ladies and gentlemen. Just kidding. So you covered a lot there. So let's go back to the beginning, because you glance over, you played college golf. What was it like growing up? Was golf your main sport at an early age?
Well, I was kind of a, jack of all trades in terms of sports. I played everything. I skied. I played basketball through high school. I played soccer through high school. Baseball was my best sport, but I realized I probably wasn't going to be a professional baseball player. So since I played baseball and golf and they were in the same season, I had to choose. So I chose golf and focused more on that, and got to be a good player after going to college. Between my junior and senior year summer, I went from a 5 handicap to a 0 90 days. And if you are a golfer, those last 5 shots getting to scratch take a long time. And so it was sun up to sundown golf, and I focused on it, and golf's been my thing since. I played basketball. We always played pickup basketball, full court, up into my 50s. So.
Oh, wow. So when let's stick with golf for a minute, because it is a passion of mine. Oh, what were the things that you worked on that you were like, okay, here, I need to get from here to there, and what were those specific things?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I had a really good college golf coach. He had won the Massachusetts State Amateur, and he was also a Marine captain. His name was Tracy Mayer, and he was really good. He had a great eye for the golf swing, and he always focused on the short game. So clearly the last 5 strokes were mostly short game. So you had to learn all the shots are on the green, and you had to get your swing to the point where it was consistent. My stroke average probably went from 75 to 80 down to 70 or 68 to 75. And so you can't hit a lot of wild shots if you're going to be shooting par or around par. And so the differential in my shots went from this wide to this wide. And so as you get closer and closer to the hole, you start making more and more birdies. If you look at the statistics on tour, it's crazy. The difference between putting from 15 feet and the difference to 10 feet is probably 25% make rate. It's significant.
And so during this time, you're playing all these different sports in high school. You're figuring out like which one that you really want to focus on. What was your schooling like? Would you have an inclination towards a specific subject? Were you good at math, science? Was there anything specific that you were better at than others?
I would say, I was probably, I was pretty good at math and sciences, but it wasn't my love. I was in the top classes there and I did fine, but I would say I majored in college in political science, and so I was very much into world affairs and understanding how countries deal with one another. I think that probably led me to becoming a lawyer. The idea of different countries' legal systems and our own legal system, and trying to understand how to communicate well, both in writing and verbally. All of that was of interest to me and served me pretty well throughout the course of my career, at least to date.
Yeah. And so when you went to law school, a lot of times I hear from people that, got their law degree or become practicing attorneys, there's usually a way they figure out pretty quickly that you're either transactional or you're a litigator. Was there anything that directed you towards one of those directions once you got into the law school?
It's a good question. I think mine was all transactional. I was representing, sports figures, and I had to have some legal background to properly advise them. But really, more than being a lawyer, I'd say it was great education. I was more of a business person and an advisor to the clients I worked with, and I had to put deals together so that they could, take advantage of their success in both in coaching and playing. So, I learned early on that I was definitely transactional, and I was focused on the business side. Most lawyers are not great business people, as neither are most doctors. And as part of my, real estate development career, I've developed 21 surgery centers across 6 states in the country. And so I dealt with hundreds, if not more, of surgeons across the country. And they did really well with our company. And I realized that, the training in law and the training in medicine, there are no business courses in either. They don't really teach, they may teach a business law course, but they certainly don't teach a medical, business course. They're teaching you how to be a doctor. And quite frankly, when I got into the surgical center development business, I think I realized that it might be intentional that they don't teach a business course to doctors because, the universities and the hospital systems dominate healthcare at this point. So I think, this is their way of having more knowledge than the people they're working with, perhaps.
So I want to talk about how the journey went from, so right after law school, then you were working with the sports
Yes,
figures?
no, in law school. Even before I had my legal degree, I was a sports agent while I was a law student. I had my first.
Oh, okay. And so when you were doing that, how long were you doing that role?
I started probably at age 23 and probably ended right around, late 30s, around age 40.
Okay, wow.
I got focused on pure business and developing, real estate and particular surgery centers first, and then other types of real estate after that.
Okay, I have a ton of questions about the real estate side of things, and I wanted you to share everything that you've been doing. But I gotta ask you about this because that's a pretty long stretch that you were working with. Were there certain things that stood out during that time, like things that you loved about it, or things that you were like, this is okay, but I want to go do something else? Like, what was your experience in that role?
I didn't think there was anything else in the world I wanted to do when I was age 23, and I did have the opportunity to do quite a lot as a sports lawyer / agent. And, I did things from testifying before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee with Strom Thurmond and Dianne Feinstein on the panel. And I was testifying about the relocation of sports franchises. And I got the chance to do for a couple of years a sports television show called The Sports Group. And it was on Prime Sports Network, which eventually was bought and became part of Fox Sports. And so I got to do that. Got the opportunity, but to work with extremely talented people in any field, be it medicine, law, sports, you got to appreciate their skills and their position. You're really there to give good advice and to facilitate opportunities for them. And I love doing that. I think by the time I got into my mid 30s, I was on the road probably 26 out of 52 weeks, and it was rough, and I had a family and still have a family, but, I missed them and they missed me, and it was probably time to try to figure out how I could be home a little bit more. And so by the time I hit my late 30s and maybe age 40, I had done everything. I was the national secretary of the Sports Lawyers Association. I mean, I had so many opportunities, and it was great. And I loved that part of my career. But it was just one part of my career. And about every 15 or so years, or 10 to 15 years, I've changed careers. And so I keep myself fresh and want to wake up every day and go to work.
Yeah, I love that mindset. And especially when there's something else I want to do, to be able to have that confidence that you've climbed the hill once. I'm going to climb this other hill too. And now you're equipped with all the tools to get up there.
Yeah. I guess not being afraid to lose. If I was going to give, at least start to give any wisdom across to your listeners, don't be afraid to lose. I mean, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Nothing gets done that's of any significance without that fearless attitude, just going forward and realizing you will make mistakes and just realizing you can correct them. And I was taught by my senior partner in the surgery center development business, when he was asked, what do we do better than everybody else in the business? Because there are a lot of people doing that. He said, well, we do 100 little things better. And he started to list them. And he said, it's not one thing. It's literally the combination of all of these things. We pay attention to the details, and we literally do 100 things better than our competition. And it makes all the difference in the world.
And so this person that you mentioned, well, actually, before we go there, we'll get to that. We'll get to that next. But when you were in the sports side of things, were there mentors or any people that you looked up to or worked with that helped you and guided you along the way on that path?
Very much so. And that applies across the board. It worked in sports for me. I had 4 or 5 people that I would always call to ask, what do you think here? Have you seen this situation before? You can't be afraid to ask for advice, but it's a fine line. You also have to project an image of confidence and competence. And so if you don't have that, you're going to have a hard time getting clients. And so behind the scenes, asking questions is critical. And I did have 4 or 5 mentors. I had a mentor at Octagon when I went, which is still one of the top 2 or 3 sports agencies in the world. And he's still there, actually. The guy that hired me is still running Octagon. So yes, never be afraid to ask for advice. It's a great way to learn.
So when you decided that you were like, it's time for a change, I want to spend more time with my family, I'm ready to make the move. How did you choose the next step? Like what were the things that you saw or that you wanted to lean into to make that transition?
That's a great question. I think I looked around for a while. I wasn't in a huge rush to figure out what was next. I took my time, and I actually, before I joined the surgery center development business, dabbled in a couple things, didn't go all in, but wanted to test and see if that was a path I wanted, and then ultimately decided not to go that way. And by the time I found the surgery center business, I'd say I shadowed the founder of the business for probably close to a year before I started actually putting together my first surgery center. And so I learned as much as I could about the business before I went out. And that goes to your last question, which is, don't be afraid to go get good advice so you can get the background. Even when I was in law school, I went to people like, Bob Wolf, who was one of the cutting edge people in sports representation. And I went to his office and talked to the people in his office and said, what do you do on a daily basis? Tell me what your job looks like. And I went to the sporting manufacturing company and I said, how do you deal with athletes? What are the representatives like when you deal with them? So I got out there and did my homework before even thinking about getting started. And I did the same when I went to my next career. And I ultimately landed on surgery center development and shadowed, as I said, for a year and then got started. Did 2 surgery centers in my first year.
Was there something specific about surgery centers versus other asset classes or types? Like how did you get, when you did your research, did something on the returns look like something that,
Yes, very much so. I realized that it was an area that was kind of ripe for more growth. And I was fortunate enough to be able to join a company that had already developed 30 surgery centers and had been in business for, say, 10 years. And so they had worked out a lot of the problems and had a pretty good platform already. And this was started by this friend of mine and, the guy I shadowed for the time. And I got to see, and I got to ask the partners in it. So the model was such that 2/3 of the shares would be owned by surgeons, local surgeons, and we would own as a company 1/3 divided by, the partners that were in it. And so I went to meetings and I asked the surgeons hard questions like, tell me some bad things about this, or what's the worst thing you can say about this company? And I think I wasn't able to find much bad. And if you count this as a bad comment, it actually isn't. They said, well, I wish I had more shares in this deal. So to me, that's they were probably properly compensated for their work and owned a fair share of the center, and the center was doing well. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the centers themselves were highly profitable. I developed a number of them on my own and a number with partners. But I can tell you the ones I worked on cost at the time $2.5 million to put together, and their annual NOI after stabilization was more than that. So we were making more than the outlay each year. And so it was a highly profitable situation when run properly.
And so when you saw this opportunity and you're shadowing and you're seeing it, was there something specific or things that are specific that the company was looking to you? Like you had these transferable skills that filled a need for them. Like what were those things that they were like, hey, you can come on board and do X, Y, Z? Were there things that really stood out that they wanted or needed from you?
Yeah, I think so. If I had to look back on it, I think the reason that they accepted me into the group was a lot of it had to do with my background. I think they thought the skill of working with a professional athlete would translate to working with medical doctors and surgeons. They saw it as, a highly talented person who highly successful, type A people, driven. I had managed dozens and dozens of these type of people, and they thought I could communicate well with them. I would present well to them. I learned the business, so I could certainly communicate what the business represented in an opportunity for them. And so the skill, I guess, was the communication and the management of the relationships was probably what I would say got me in the door.
So with your experience and doing this thing, I'm sure, and you talk about development, were there any things that jumped out to you as specific challenges that you had to learn, whether it's, putting together pro formas or, working with lender or anything with the development, construction costs, like the schedules, like anything like that, anything that when you look back that you're like, wow, that was a learning curve?
I think, all of it was a learning curve for me because I had never really developed a surgery center before I did it. Right. And so
that's why I'm thinking like,
I asked a lot of questions, right? So, yeah. and there were 30 that were done before I joined the company. So all of that learning was passed along to me. So I didn't have to, it wasn't pure trial and error. There were certain parameters that were expected. Here's the formula. Follow this pattern. There may be some variations. Literally, I dealt with everything from putting the group together to finding the location where we were going to, put our center to. I didn't have to choose the construction arm because we dealt with one of 3 national companies that would come in and build the centers. I had to choose the equipment with help of our doctor partners because they ultimately had to have input on what equipment they wanted. We selected the staffing using, recommendations from the local surgeons. We wrote protocols, with the surgeons, all fully input. They had 4 of the 5 managerial roles, or at least decision-making roles on the board, the local boards. So, all of it was learning for me. I wasn't afraid to learn. I'm still not afraid to learn. I try to do it every day. I was on Duolingo the other day, trying to learn a little French. It's just, keeping that curiosity alive, right? Keeping wanting to learn. But I knew I had to learn it because that's what I'd chosen to do. And I wanted to be successful at it. And ultimately, I would call my experience there successful. So
yeah. And so with all these surgery centers, did you guys have a specific focus on types of surgery centers? Were there, orthopedics versus, I guess cosmetic? Like what was the delta there?
There was a formula to it. So we almost always exclusively worked with orthopedic surgeon. That would be all types of ortho. Some spine surgeons, because some spine surgeries can be done outpatient. Ear, nose, and throat, sinus stuff, and some ear surgeries could be done. We worked with podiatry because podiatry worked well. Pain management, injections and that kind of stuff. Those are surgical procedures under the code. Occasionally, we had, other specialties in there if we found the right partners. I had a group of 3 urologists in a DC center that did a terrific job. I've had ophthalmologists in a couple of centers, but generally speaking, those 4 or 5 core specialties were in every one of my centers.
Did you have do you have you don't have to tell me any stories or any horror stories or anything, but a specific type of surgeon or a group that are better to work with than others?
Well, the surgeons that were hospital oriented were, for most of their cases, were not going to be good targets for us. We wanted people that could do outpatient surgery because it was beneficial to them and it was beneficial to their patients. We were reorienting the importance within the medical equation. Instead of the importance being on hospitals and insurance companies, we wanted the importance to be on surgeons and patients. And so to the degree that the surgeon could bring a fair number, at least a third was by legal bounds, but a fair number of their cases to an outpatient center and do their cases there, that was a limiting factor. If they couldn't bring a third of their cases to a surgery center, they weren't in safe harbor, and we were not going to offer them. And
so you mentioned the legal parameters and the things and the codes. Was there any drastic changes in that world that you had to adjust during that time?
Nothing drastic. The individual surgical codes and the reimbursements changed each year. And so if a particular surgery was a good one for us, it would be an outpatient surgery. And if the reimbursements were going up, they would become things that we would target surgeons that would do those, right? If, for instance, during the time I was with the surgery center company, ophthalmological surgery, some of them, were cut by 50% or 75%. And so they become less of a focus for us. I mean, we'll still do those cases if we have an ophthalmological surgeon as a partner, as a kind of a courtesy, but we targeted surgeries that were, one, great for the patient, outpatient, good for the surgeon, outpatient, and we could actually, it would make sense to have it as part of our business. We weren't in business to lose money. We weren't just taking the cream of the crop. We took Medicare. We took TRICARE, which is for the military. So at the end of the day, you have to run it like a business, and we were very good to do that. But we weren't excluding people that were under, sort of the lesser payers, right? And so we were fine with that. I'd love to talk a little bit about our this company that we're building in Houston right now, which is the company I'm involved with day to day now. This is all fun stuff to talk about, but it's that chapter a while back, and
yeah. Well, hey, listen, the whole this is a platform we have to talk about people's journeys, right? And so a lot of things and the lessons that people learn are not just sort of like, oh, this is what I'm doing. People like our audience and a lot of what we do, and I completely respect that, and we'll talk about all that right now. But a lot of things that how you got here is a big part of that story. This is about you and the company and your experience. So so when you closed that chapter and you moved into this new one, first, before we jump into that, what was that moment that you were like, here, I'm going to do this thing next?
Sure. So I guess let me tell you how I closed the chapter. I think when I got to the point where I felt like I was doing the same thing every day and not growing individually, and I didn't have much room for growth in the business because all the partners were secure in their positions and weren't going anywhere. And so what happened was I had completed my first center, and I basically looked around, and a number had been sold off. So I had cashed out of those, so to speak. I think it was time for a change. So I essentially retired from that business. I took a year to really think about what I wanted to do next. And I went and talked to a number of people, and I talked to a couple of my longest standing friends from growing up in Connecticut, and they're real estate people. And we kicked around the idea of starting a company together, and they introduced me to somebody out in California who was coming to work for them, and I was very impressed. And so, I think I chose the next path based on my partners. I found partners I trusted and had great experience in real estate. And secondly, I thought we could build a company around this person. And so I wasn't sure what it was going to look like, but I was willing to invest in her and put my time and money and energy into developing something with this person. And she's proven to be a great partner. She was a founder with us in this new business. Yeah, I'd say what I learned was it is good to invest in people. It is good. And certainly we had a germ of an idea, but we've changed it. We've pivoted probably 50 times since we started this company. And we've had levels of success each point of the way. But in order to become a national company, we had to take a major pivot about 2 years ago. And we can talk about it if you want.
Well, let's start with you said you met this person, you were impressed. What was it about that initial instance that you were like, oh, this person's impressive? Was it anything that jumps out on what was so impressive?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm always very impressed when someone starts with nothing and ends up, in a great place. And so she was one of those people. She literally came to the United States with a degree, but not with a job and with zero money. And she came and built herself up, and she was from the Philippines. And she's a tremendously hardworking person, really bright, very motivated, got her MBA when she got here, has worked for some of the biggest companies in real estate, including Equity, including Graystar, including Redwood. I mean, some really huge names in real estate, and has reached, executive vice president levels at these companies. And so I thought she knew enough about the multifamily world, and that's the world I was interested in, because I thought there was a big opportunity there, and I still think there's a big opportunity for us there, but I also think there's a big opportunity for everybody there. I think there's a few things right now that the industry, although very successful, is missing. And since it's missing these things, it leaves a chance for other people to step in and, kind of outperform the marketplace, if you will. And so that's why we're in business. And that's why we're doing what we're doing.
And what is her name?
Her name is Jerry Betancourt.
Okay, nice. All right. So, and then you said you had this germ of an idea. What was the initial kernel that you were like, yeah, let's dive into this?
Yeah. So if I'm sure you have a pretty decent sense of the multifamily industry. So one thing we noticed very early on was there seems to be a weakness in the leasing position. The position in the leasing office, the actual leasing agent, who is, first of all, the position turns over 2 or 3 times a year. It's just one of these volatile positions. It's a non-licensed position. And unlike other forms of commercial real estate, which gets leased by brokers and agents who are licensed and have, continuing ed courses annually and all kinds of oversight, the position here is the least trained, least experienced person, most volatile position, yet it's still responsible for 100% of all revenues for that property, which drives everything that property does. So we saw this as an opportunity. Then we dug in a little differently and we said, okay, we're finding that a lot of temporary agencies are placing people in the leasing offices without skills. And so we found in a big market like Houston, maybe as many as 20% of the leasing agents were placed there by temporary agencies, BG and Liberty particularly, and others. That can't be a good thing. Those people are not properly trained to do their job there. And so we thought at the very beginning, all we had to do was go recruit people, train them, and put them out in the marketplace as replacements for BG and Liberty's temporary people. And it proved to be successful from the first person we hired and trained. That person immediately, within 2 weeks, was offered a manager's job by the property. Okay? And so, we knew we were onto something. It was kind of a check mark, right? Check number 1. We found a weakness in the market. We can do something about it and provide a better service. So we started doing that, and we got about up to 80 or 90 leasing agents that we recruited from thousands of resumes. And we were trying to run a leasing team, and we were doing a pretty decent job, but it was difficult. The human capital, even at the highest end of recruiting, is very difficult to manage. It's just so time consuming, and the margins are not great. So we evolved quickly from putting generally skilled leasing agents out in the marketplace to these high quality leasing teams that would come in and be more like fire departments coming in or SWAT teams coming in to address a real problem that, a property's at 82% occupied, get us to 95 so we can go refinance and get a better rate and stabilize this property. And so we did that for a couple of years, and we were really going in and fixing everybody's properties. I mean, we did all the big names. I won't go into them. Certainly not intending to embarrass anybody. But we did take on pretty challenging tasks, and we were able to do it. So kudos to our people. Our people were really excellent at doing the job, and we outperformed and fixed a lot of problems. Then we realized that we didn't want to just run these high-end leasing teams around the country, because that was also limited. How many can you have? 50 teams? 100 teams? There's certainly a limitation on what you can manage. And so we said, well, let's look at this differently. We have these skills. We have this knowledge. Let's turn it into some tools that other people can use, and then we can give it to the marketplace. So the marketplace can keep the leasing people they have on site, have them assessed properly, and then trained properly, and then reassessed. And so they can use our assessment tools and they can use our training tools to get better on their own with maybe minimal oversight by us. And so we felt we could become a national company that way by providing tools as opposed to providing actual human capital. And that's how we got to where we are today.
And so that concept of developing a system over than just, a Band-Aid or like plug and play, but an actual system that people can use. I've seen that some of my closest friends or my very close friends have done that in other verticals, and they've had a lot of success. And that's where it is. You build the system, you build the platform to do so. But I have a question about that. What you were doing as far as like training and building the system. Are there other things that are involved when, let's say, you can bring in a leasing team or give them the system or give them the roadmap, but there's some things that are like, hey, unless you put some paint on this or unless you solve this problem, how much does that come about in what you're doing? Like you can do as much as you can, but if you don't plug these holes in the ship, nothing's going to happen, or you're not going to get the results that you want.
That's a great lead-in to describing what's the REV leasing score, we'll call it. So REV leasing score, sort of like a credit score, which is on an 850 scale. We do a leasing score for the property's leasing performance, okay? And that scale is on a 700-point basis. And we break it into three categories. The one you're referring to with the paint is the property category. So there are three P's. There's the property category that we're assessing. There's the person category that we're assessing. And there's the process efficiency that we're assessing. So, all three are weighted a little differently, but each one plays a part in, as you say, getting to the lease, right? And so if you care to guess, we've done this leasing score even in the last couple of years on 300 properties. If you care to guess what the best score is nationally, literally across the country right now, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that. Guess high, guess low, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, I would say on a 700-point scale, I would say the higher end would be 650.
Okay, that's kind of what we expected as well. So far to date, the best score of the 300 scores is 485.
Really?
Yep, really. And so that falls in our high end of good category. Very good would be 500 and up, and excellent would be 600 and up. And so the best performance, both on an individual property and on a company-wide basis for companies we've scored more than 3 of their properties, is 485. And the best average blended score is somewhere around the low 400s, like between 400 and 410. So what that tells us, and I think you might agree, is there's a lot of room for leasing improvement. And so leasing improvement turns into NOI improvement and risk elimination and stability and better treatment in financial markets. You'll get better cap rates. You'll get better lending rates. All of these things, you'll get more capital investment, right? You'll attract more investment capital. All of these things can be affected by performing better on the revenue generation side. We think we're really in the middle of things and working on something that really benefits all investors, all owners, all asset managers, all lenders. All of these kinds of audiences should be interested in higher performance and more stability.
So on the 3Ps, I want to focus on people for a minute. That's a big part of it. And actually, my first introduction, my career into real estate was on the leasing side for residential. And I think a big part of my success there was focus. I just am naturally curious. I get along with people pretty well. I had a great relationship with a lot of the people that I put into the houses, some of them were multifamily, a lot of them were single family. I had a great relationship with a lot of them. So when it came to, them getting a noise violation or something like that, I could, just call them and say, hey, dude, knock it off, and we had that good relationship. So I think that's so important to really focus on that and teach people how to do that, because for a lot of people, it's not natural. You have to learn, you have to teach them how to listen, how to pay attention, how to take notes, how to do certain things. So I just think that's a key part of the formula.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, even the company that got the best score, which is on the very high end of good, they're actually doing a pilot program with us right now on 14 of their properties, because their president decided that being good was good, but he wanted to be great. And so he said, there's some room here for improvement. Let's do it. And so they're on board with us at this point. But your point is well taken. And I bring that up because even for a company like them that's performing at a very high level of good and leading the industry, by the way, and they've won other awards in the industry. So it's not just us giving them this high mark. The industry itself gives them awards almost every year. And so we found and it's early, but we've done our scoring of their properties, and we found we've started we're in our third week of training right now with them. And there's at least 3 areas where they can improve significantly. And what you touched on is one of them, the discovery area, right? The connection between the leasing agent and the prospect. They have to really understand that prospect. They have to discover what things are driving the decision of the prospect. What's important to the prospect. And so this company is not doing a great job of that. And consequently, the next thing the next of this goes from discovery to benefit selling. So if you're going to be selling benefits, you've got to understand what benefits are going to be important to your prospect. And so they're missing some opportunities here because they're not connecting properly and they're not properly benefit selling, which then leads to a weaker closing ratio. So, the process of leasing builds on itself. If you don't start it well, as you mentioned, you're going to have a really hard time getting to the end. So being a people person helps in leasing. This is not news to anybody. But even if you're not a pure people person, you may want to be on the management side, but you can still get through leasing and do a good job at leasing if you follow the process correctly, if you do cross the T's and dot the I's and follow up properly and treat people properly and listen, right? Listening is really important. And then applying what you heard to what they want. All of these things are really important in the leasing process. And so we go through all of this in terms of our training. We have 130 online courses, and we keep improving it each and every day. It's a work in progress. Like my other businesses, we're not stopping where we are. We're going to continue improving it. We're putting AI, we're using AI every single day in everything we're doing. And we feel like if we don't use AI, we may very well, miss the train. And so fear is a great motivator. And so we're in there fearful we're going to miss the train and working really hard not to. Well, and we're using AI every single day. But But, it's a good point you brought up, and thank you for doing that.
No, absolutely. And I'll add another note on that and how important that is. And as you use the term discovery, sometimes I'll give a specific example. This is more on the commercial side, but I remember a few years ago, I had a tenant that asked for something. They had just done their lease renewal, and they gave them a bunch of things that they asked for. And then like a couple months later, they're like, hey, can you ask the owners of the building? Cause it was third party management. And they were like, can you ask the owners if they'll, help pay for this thing? And I was like, well, I mean, I'll ask, but I mean, I know your lease, you know your lease, and it's for you, but I'll ask. Let's see. And so I asked the owner, and they laughed and said no. But I went back to them and I said, hey, listen, they said no. However, I do know a vendor that does this. They do a great job. Reach out to them and see what they can do. And they were like, thank you. And that didn't take that long. It was like, all told, that was like 45 minutes of my time to answer their question, ask, and then they were so grateful that I helped them. And I'm like, well, actually, I don't really think I did that much. I just asked a couple of questions, but sometimes you forget that those small things, that just listening to somebody and just making that effort and sharing some knowledge can go a long way. And, still have a great relationship with the tenant, the vendor, the owner. And it's not really that hard as long as you just do it, like do those things. I mean, it's funny. It seems so simple sometimes, but it can be a challenge to get people to understand that.
Yeah, I think you naturally do it. I think I probably naturally do it. I like helping people. Even if it's a favor, I like to do favors for people. I think, what goes around comes around, and even if it doesn't, I don't care. And so I feel good when I've helped someone eliminate a problem or solve something that they're working on. And obviously you feel the same way. I think one of the things I'd like to, if you don't mind, just kind of take off on a little
Please,
bit.
Hey, the stage is yours.
Not really, but I'll
go for it, man.
I'll borrow your stage for a minute.
For it.
I like to leave an audience with one or two gold nuggets. I call them gold nuggets. Whenever I used to go to conferences, I felt like I was there for 1, 2, 3 days. If I learned one or two things, I'd say I'm taking my 2 gold nuggets back with me, right? So in this case, I think if you're a multifamily investor, focus on leasing, right? Leasing will tell you so much. Let's say you're buying a property, for instance, and there are a lot of people out there buying multifamily properties. They probably have never thought of looking at anything beyond the balance sheet, or checking to see how many leases they're getting per month, or that can be broken down further. We collect data on this exactly, okay? So if, let's say someone got 7 leases last month in a property they're looking at, and they got 9 the month before and 6 the month before that, what they don't know, Dustin, is whether those 6 leases represented 6 out of 30 opportunities, or they were 6 out of 7 opportunities, right? They're not measuring how well that property is doing by capturing its revenues, okay? So if they used our scoring model, they would know exactly how well the property is doing. So let's say the price is $1 million, just to pick a number, okay? Pick $1 million. If the $1 million price is based on someone getting 6 out of 30 leases, you probably are buying something with some upside, okay? Because you put together a better leasing team, you're gonna raise revenues there. The property's gonna be worth more. If you're buying a property where they're getting 6 out of 7 leases, that property is probably aggressively priced or properly priced, depending on your perspective. If you're selling, it's properly priced. You don't have a lot of upside. It's another tool that can be used as people are in the transactional phase to see whether they're overpaying or underpaying for a property. I think that's a valuable nugget.
When you're looking for potential clients, is there a sweet spot for you that you feel like your process, your system, your company adds the most value? Is there a certain geographic region, location, asset size? Where's your sweet spot?
I would say our sweet spot is owner-managed multifamily, because when an improvement or change is made, it's felt immediately to the bottom line, and the owner sees that. Third-party managed properties don't tend to put the same focus on revenue generation. They're probably focused on the 100 other things that have to get done on that property during the month. And so we don't focus on third-party managed properties. Merchant builders tend to be clients of ours because they're building to be sold. So they want to get leased up as quickly as possible and they want to maintain that momentum. But the thing is about what we're doing, the training side of what we're doing can be used by anybody. I mean, there is a true weakness in leasing in multifamily. It's just a turnover position manned right now by the least experienced, sometimes least talented person in the office, and it can be improved. And so we look at it as if, I mean, I had one really high-powered executive in multifamily tell me she was afraid to invest in the leasing position, which basically flipped a switch on in me. And I said, listen, you can't ignore this. You have to pay attention to this. You've got a problem. You're recognizing the problem. You're telling me you have a problem. You can't let it fester. If you attack the problem and you turn it into an asset instead of a liability, you've now stabilized your property. You've now removed risk in your property. You've now built value in your property. You've built, by the way, turning a leasing professional into someone that's proud to be in that position changes the whole dynamic of the property. Remember, the leasing person is often, almost always, the first person that a prospect meets. They're setting the tone for the whole company. You want that person happy and stable and professional. And so, at the end of the day, anyone can use our training. And I think the owner-managed asset managers, will probably be more focused on our scoring. But even doing any training, you want to kind of know where you are. So scoring it just tells you where you should focus most of your training. So I can see it really working for everybody. But I think training will catch on quicker because everyone realizes that training is really that important.
Yeah, I think I would agree with your thesis and your market assessment, and I think you're going to have a lot of success here. Another question that I have for you, just about who you're looking at. So, are you thinking of, or have you already looked at any of the national organizations for multifamily, like
NAA?
And MHC?
We have our own certification. We don't actually, get the people we train get certified under a Texas labor organization. So okay. we actually have our own certification process, so we can provide that to anyone completing our courses. So I know people like certifications and organizations like it because it shows at least they've trained their people and it limits some liability, some exposure for them. And so not only are the people happy to have that designation after their name, but the ownership is happy to have eliminated some liability issues.
Yeah. Well, I'm not even considering just the certifications, I know some of the apartmentalized, like some of the large organizations that are focused on moving the industry forward. There's a lot of great conferences and people that I've met. So anyway, just wondered there, because maybe I can even make some connections for you there too. Because there's some good people in the industry that would love to hear more about what you're doing. I would
be happy to go speak at any of these conferences if it made sense. I mean, look, I've done a few multifamily panels in the past, probably maybe a half dozen, and they're typically pretty good. But yeah, I would love to get more involved in that. I find getting on these discussions, these podcasts are really helpful. I like to reach people. I think, all we're trying to do is, help people in the industry upgrade, some of the skill level and provide better returns for people who are investors.
Yeah, that's a win-win-win-win. The industry, the owners, the tenants, everybody. So yeah. So one last thing, if you talk about these gold nuggets, is there a through line that you would say as far as your career and your experience to who you are and what it is, that the impact that you're making in the world? Is there something that you're like, this is me, that like every part about it? I can think of some after saying you, like, of wanting to take that next step and being confident enough to take that journey. But is there something that you think?
I think, I'm purely an entrepreneur, and I think, where I have chosen to put my focus has been in areas where I could have, I'm hopeful, the biggest impact on the industry I'm in. And so that's probably my through line. Find an area where you can be good at something, and find, an area where you can help people within an industry, raise up the level of the industry. So if that, and it's been true in probably, my 3 or 4 careers. And so that's probably the best through line I can give you on short notice.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to include all your information and everything in the show notes, but is there any last thing you want to give your website and any other places where people can find you?
Sure. We can be found at rev-leasing.com, and we'd love to schedule a demo and have people learn more about us and see if what we're doing fits what they're doing.
All right. Well, Peter, you've been very gracious with your time. Thank you. Congrats on your success, all of your successes, family, life, different careers. It's an amazing journey. You're living life.
Thank you, Dustin. Great to meet you. Enjoyed our conversation. And I know you're doing some great things as well.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Take care.